That's the good stuff right here. Hard, soft literature. Yeah. I mean, sort of, kind of. I tell you what, I'll check it out. You know, I'm not normally one to destroy books, but I'm just kind of big for it. Yeah, folks, Fruit and Doggy here to do another book discussion, and this time I'm discussing The Stars Are Also Fire by, I want to say, Poul Henderson? Not just Paul. But anyways, this book is 560 pages and was published in 1994. And I was somewhat curious about this book because it clearly wasn't the first book out of the series, which I wasn't aware of when I wasn't paying enough attention to when I was getting it, and it turns out to be the second out of a 4-part series. And as I was looking it up, it seems that the series overall has pretty mediocre reviews. And I believe this gentleman is pretty well respected within the sci-fi community for his works. So I think perhaps what happened is that as he got older, perhaps his style got worse. I think one person was saying that he basically became way too verbose, way too wordy for his own good, and it was a diminished return as well. So you're getting a lot more theoretical content in sheer volume and size, but as far as actual meat and storyline and characters, it was actually worse. So if you are wanting to look into him further, it seems that his earlier book works would be more highly recommended. And I would have to say that with the general consensus, I'd have to agree that this was not the best book I've ever read. Not horrible, not horrendous, but it certainly wasn't worth the time I put into it. And I'll just start off. Wait, does this one have a... Okay, yeah, here we go. Here's the summary for the book on the front cover page. It is the dawn of a new era of space exploration and colonization. Dagny Baynak, excuse me, descendant of the legendary Anson Guthrie, becomes a heroine of a new Lunarian civilization that struggles to break free of the influence of Earth. And that's the big part of it, is the Lunarian civilization. Anyway, centuries later, the entire solar system is dominated by a vast network of machine intelligences. On Earth and Luna, splintered fragments of humanity search for some way to survive in a system that no longer seems to hold a place for flesh and blood. And the only solution lies in the distant past and the life of Dagny Baynak. Now, I will say that this summary would suggest that there's a lot of conflict and a lot of issues going on. So we're looking at the more galactic issue. It talks about how there's a network of intelligent machines that are in control. And basically, this isn't a la the Matrix, where you have machines that are warring against humans, trying to stomp them beneath their heel, or like iRobot, where they're trying to take complete dominion and control. That's not at all what's going on, even though the little summary would sort of hint at and tease that that's the issue. Instead, what it is, I'll start off more simply. It starts off with human advancement in this kind of world and setting, that humans developed more refined machines, then they became intelligent, thinking creatures, whether they had a soul or not, sort of a non-issue, because they became so intelligent and so sophisticated that with their processing power, they were more competent than humans. And they became, their term was Sophotex. And then as multiple Sophotex were made and distributed all throughout both the planet Earth, and then the moon Mars and then various asteroids that were colonized, they became a network system of multiple intelligences that became sort of a thinking network, if you will. So the sum is greater than the parts. The sum of the whole is the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Helps if you start on the right part of the phrase to get it correctly. Kept starting on the wrong part. Sorry. And so it's a thinking mechanism that is built up through the contributions of all those intelligent machines. And what it's basically doing is trying to gather absolute knowledge. And again, this isn't like the Justice League Brainiac style where it's going to gather the knowledge, keep the data, and then demolish everything. What its intention is through the millions and billions and perhaps even trillions of years, as everything starts to slowly break down, as matter, the stars slowly wither away, the planets crumble into dust, that this network of intelligence would basically survive on. And so it's basically absolute goal is just knowledge for the sake of knowledge, if you will. And the relationship it has with human beings is more or less benevolent. They have such great intelligence that they control all the machines. It's not that they control the machines, but through their vast network, through all the different things that they're doing around the world and the colonies, they are directing human interactions. And I guess the best way to put that without going into further and further detail is basically a little bit like iRobot, but again, much more benevolent. Not in a dictatorship style, but hey, this is how you guys should do things, and here's recommendations that you should take. Though, with the conflict that is put through the book, there's a small couple of indications that with the reports that they generate, that the information they send to individuals in charge, they might be holding back tidbits and bits and information for their own agenda. Because the way the book tries to summarize it is that in order for them to gain absolute knowledge, they have to have absolute control. And this gets really strange. I didn't understand. I didn't even really get the concept. Was that they would become so smart they could comprehend and understand everything and account for every possibility, but only if human beings were controlled to an extent. And I didn't get that. It seemed like such an arbitrary restriction. And that becomes one of the major conflicts in the book. And it just seemed very artificial and strange to me. And then the other main conflict in the book is between the Earth and the Moon. And as the story progresses, what you discover is that human beings, as they were exploring the Moon and dealing with the differences in gravity, the lack of atmosphere, and then still trying to bring the technology and the resources, materials necessary to colonize it, they altered human DNA to the extent that those new humans would be compatible with that environment. Now, not the lack of atmosphere, they still needed oxygen, but the lower center of gravity, the lower force of gravity, their bones, their body structure would be compatible and would be fitting and appropriate for that environment. And with those changes to DNA, what ends up happening is that it goes beyond just the physical. They also seem to have a different personality, mindset, attitude, so on and so forth. So not alien enough that they are unrecognizable, but the book kept describing them as cat-like. And there's one thing that actually really annoyed me about the book, is that it described them as being very cold, calculating, aloof, emotionally distant and reserved, and then said, well, they don't have the temperament for politics. And that is complete bullcrap, because one of the main characters of the book, she is a Lunarian, and the reason she is such a thorn in the side, or such an antagonist, is because of her mindset and her attitude, her conniving ways, i.e. the mindset and attitude of a politician. You know, thinking ahead, planning ahead, putting off resources and setting up networks and holding things off for a rainy day. You never know when that might come up. And she's not seen as, you know, an anomaly amongst her people. She's a great example of that. So as I read the book and I kept seeing how different Lunarians would have this attitude of arrogance and not quite a superiority, but definitely arrogance and aloofness, I just thought that would be the perfect attitude for politics. And all of their the actions that they take, the way that they scheme and maneuver around things, the way that they pit themselves against human beings on Earth and, you know, plot things out. It's like, yeah, they would just be terrible at politics. All these actions and all these maneuvers, you know, that is not the way a politician acts. So there was a strong disconnect between what the book claimed and then what the book showed. And I think that's just a very simple example of how the book didn't seem to be logically cohesive. It seemed to have cognitive dissonance, if that makes any sense, giving almost a personification to the book. But I just think that the author really got kind of lost, and as they kept writing and putting in more stuff, they weren't meshing. Their ideas weren't meshing out. They weren't being fleshed out in thoughtful ways. It just didn't add up. And I should mention that with the way the book works, it takes, I want to say 5 different perspectives throughout the book, 5 main characters. So there's basically a male and female lead, or the protagonist. They're working for somebody else, and I guess I'll clarify more. The female lead is basically just an Earth lady who is inspired by her love for metahumans, and they are otter people. And again, this is just a whole nother layer that the book throws in. And it doesn't even really matter. Now, it might matter more through the rest of the series, but anyways, so that's one of the main leads. The main male lead, he was an astronaut, more or less retired at this point, and so he's in love with space. That's his calling. And they are working for the conniving Lunarian female I mentioned earlier. And all 3 of them are more or less seen as the protagonists. There is a male who is somewhat of the antagonist. And I guess I should mention the Lunarian. I almost wound up seeing her more as an anti-hero more than anything, but the theoretical antagonist, he's in charge of a security force that works for the sofa techs in that network, because he's a special kind of human that can also tap into that network as a human agent, which is atypical. Or a select number of people can do that. And then the other person was the Dagny Baynek that was mentioned earlier. Her story takes place, it seems, a couple 100 years before the main events in the book. And what happens is that the book keeps jumping between perspectives, and throughout the story it keeps going back to her events in the past, her colonization efforts, and developing Lunarian society, a society on the moon. And honestly, I don't know that it was readable, but it definitely took me a while to figure out what the heck was going on with all the shifting perspectives. And once, probably about 100 pages, give or take, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, I started understanding what was going on with the plot line, who I was following, and why. And trying to think, going back to Dagny Baynak, the anomaly of this story, the one whose events have already taken place. She's the person from the past. As it discusses her story, she is one of the female lead. She's a very prominent figure in the story, in the I would say the lore, and basically like a hero figure for the moon. Despite being completely human, she does basically start the Lunarian race. And one thing that I really found disagreeable about her, and it only took place later on, I'm going into spoiler territory, just so you know, she is of course the mother of some Lunarian children, and throughout the course of the story, those Lunarian children or one in particular conspires to commit murder. And so there's two individuals, her son, and then who the son hired to commit the murder, in essence. And they get away with it scot-free. She figures it out very quickly. She knows what they did, why, and she basically winds up siding with them. Now, it says that her loyalties are basically split, that she's not taking one side or the other, but she does want Lunarians to be free and independent. She just wants to keep peace between everybody, but honestly, it seemed like her loyalties were stronger towards the Lunarians, especially since, again, they got away with murder, literally, and as the story suggests and indicates, that the Lunarians, as they keep resisting Earth, they do that multiple times. They commit murder, they conspire, they break the laws. They are basically flagrantly disregarding the laws, the systems in place. And what she winds up telling people, trying to work things out with Lunarians, is, well, you know, you need to give them their space. They need that room. And basically the Earth needed to keep backing off and give ground and let the Lunarians do whatever they wanted. That's a bit of an overstatement, but that's kind of how it came off to me. And my sympathies were not towards the Lunarians. Because although it's true that they're anatomically different from human beings, and then they are definitely better suited for living on the moon. Human beings can live on the moon. It just needs to they have to take certain adjustments, like exercising, to maintain their physical health. Like higher gravity, because they're not used to the lower force of gravity. But I suppose my main issue is that they act as if they deserve complete independence from the Earth, and they've not earned it. They've not done anything to indicate that they deserve to be completely separate and sovereign, in my opinion, because it was throughout all the course of human history and human beings going to the moon, bringing all the resources, bringing all the materials, setting everything up, and then they even made the Lunarians. So the Lunarians wouldn't exist without human beings. The planet wouldn't be developed or colonized at all without human beings, without all the toil and work that the people on Earth have done through millennia. And they should be completely sovereign and independent and have no tie, not necessarily no ties, but they shouldn't be under any authority under the earth because, well, they made up their own language and their songs, and there's some subtle differences. It's like, oh wow, good job, guys. Oh wait, oh, because you live on the moon and because it's to your own benefit, you're developing your, I'll say, like, smaller planet. You're developing your colony. Ooh, wow, good job. I guess that means you should be completely sovereign. I mean, give me a break. And it seems like the only reason, truthfully, that they're able to get away with this so much is because on the Earth, what was taking place was complete chaos, nations falling apart, a lot of civil war, unrest, just mass destruction, the breakdown of society. Excuse me. And I just thought it was really, I just thought it was, I just wasn't on the side of the Lunarians at all. And with everything that I've said so far, it probably sounds as if this book would be rich with conflict and a lot of action and different events taking place. But a lot of that is just summarized up, and truthfully, the actual conflict in the book is centered around everybody just being discontent. So in essence, the Lunarians, it's like, we want to be completely sovereign, and if we're not completely sovereign, and if human beings keep coming to the moon, then we're just going to lose our spirit and our individuality and we'll die off. And I'm just thinking, why does that matter so much? You can't hang around with human beings? That's such a detriment? I mean, you're still the more fit society for that area. You're really just gonna hang up your hats and die off? And then human beings, because we've already explored the stars and we've landed on the moon and we've set up colonies, there's just nothing left to explore. And even though we have all of our basic needs met, you don't really even need to work. You can kind of just idle about and engage in your hobbies and maybe do a little bit of side work for extra money, for extra luxuries, because there's a basic universal income and all your resources are granted and your needs are met. Yeah, everybody's just kind of bored, shiftless, they don't have anything to do. It's just a general sense of discontent. And people, I guess, are so unenthused that they're not even reproducing very much. Children are becoming somewhat of a scarcity, again, despite a population that's still in the billions. And I just thought that was complete malarkey, because again, if everybody is that bored, if they can pursue their interests and hobbies at their discretion and at their will, I have a hard time thinking that people's sex drives would just plummet out of nowhere. And one of the things the book kept harping on was this kind of romantic ideal for going off into space and exploring the stars. And honestly, I know there are people out there who are completely on fire for exploration, travel, trying to explore the new frontier. But I think that they are completely neglecting the point that that's a small set of people. Most people are completely happy to be within their home and to be within their region of the world. Probably about a century or two ago, most people didn't travel beyond 20 miles away from where they were born. People live within a very small area. If there wasn't a need, you didn't go too far away from home. And if I can find a reference point to support that, and I would like to do a little more research into that anyways, I'll supply a link on that. So, looking around at current United States society and our culture, I think it's pretty clear that with how we are desperately looking for ways to entertain ourselves, and we're not, really unsatisfied with having our needs met, with having luxuries, and like, hey, if I can have all the comforts of home, and they just keep getting more comfortable. A lot of people are perfectly fine just staying at home watching TV, watching movies, getting on their computer, so on and so forth, maybe going out to eat. So I'm not seeing it. I don't understand how there can be this much dissatisfaction. I mean, I can to an extent, because again, first world problems, how we can complain despite more or less having far greater comforts and luxuries than people have ever had in human history. But when you take away almost all problems, all stressors, which would include money, I just don't understand how people could be just that broken in spirit. That just doesn't add up to me. And that's honestly the almost entirety of the book, is everybody just being discontent, and there seems to be very little reason, very shallow conflict or rationale given. And I will admit that there was one part near the very end of the book that actually ticked me off. And I'll admit this is probably a stronger response than was appropriate, but it just irked me, because I will also mention that throughout the book, as they talked about exploring the stars, and as their technology advanced and all their problems were solved, they basically said, well, who needs a god when you've got this network of intelligent AI to answer all your questions for you? Or, in some ways to say, it's like, well, we've got the internet, who needs God? And so there was a lot of general reference to that idea that, God just was an unnecessary force, and it was rather dismissive of God. And I thought this was probably the strongest statement along those lines, and it's where the main male lead is speaking to the intelligent AI. And here's the statement. He thought that the Terramind, that's the name of the network, had no need to bluster like the god of Job. It could afford patience, yes, courtesy. I mean, really? That really cheesed me off, because what it's basically saying is that, when God in the book of Job was speaking to Job, he was blustering. He wasn't exhibiting patience. He wasn't a yeah, basically the Terramind was, again, greater than God in essence, and that annoyed me to no end. I was just amazed by that, but I really shouldn't be, because I think that's one of this will be a discussion through a whole nother video about how I think our modern age, especially in the scientific community, I think is remarkably arrogant. But anyways, that'll be for another day. But yeah, I thought this book was rather weak. I mean, basically a story without realistic and a strong conflict to drive the events in the story, it doesn't hold up. And so a book that's not quite 600 pages long, with a conflict founded on everybody being unhappy just because, doesn't really hold up. And I've been speaking for quite a long time, and I didn't even discuss one of the other elements of the book that's rather stupid, and that's, in essence, another thing that I'm not even go into it. I've been speaking so long right now, and it doesn't even add anything more. It's just, this book is very pointless overall, I would say. So I can't recommend it. I don't think the other books in the series would be any better based on the mediocre reviews overall. So I would say this falls into the burn it category. Like, and it's also ironically appropriate because the stars are also fire, and so is this book when you throw it in the fireplace. I think that's probably the best place for it to go. But anyways, folks, this is probably one of my longer book discussions, and I'm just sad for it to be wasted on a book that had so little to say overall. But I guess I made up for that by doing the same thing the author did, talking too much and using too many words. So anyways, have a good one, folks. See you later.